Hi, everyone. I'm Shelley Lyle.
And I'm Brian Avery.
And welcome to Voices from the Field, a podcast brought to you by the Department of Sport Management at the University of Florida. This podcast was created to share the career journeys of sport industry professionals. Our hope is that you learn the ins and outs of different sport industry professions. We're excited to be with all of you this week and with our special guest, Kim Bastable. Kim is the president of Vital Leadership and an adjunct professor and director of professional tennis at the University of Florida.
Yeah, so Kim received her bachelor's in finance and business administration from the University of Florida, go Gators, and her master's in positive coaching from the University of Missouri. Her work experience includes being an assistant women's tennis coach at the University of Kansas, a head boys and girls tennis coach at Kansas City Christian School, and an elite professional at the U.S. Professional Tennis Association, now for over 22 years. So Kim is currently the president of Vital Leadership, as we discussed, and an adjunct professor and director of professional tennis management for the University of Florida. Thank you for being with us today, Kim.
Super happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Definitely. We're looking forward to this conversation, and go Gators, right?
Go Gators.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, Kim, can you tell us a little bit about, your career journey and, also explaining what you do now at the end, but really want to hear, you've got a lot of experience in the tennis world. So tell us a little bit about that and how you knew that you wanted to make tennis a career.
Absolutely. I love tennis, and I'm actually kind of fascinated that I am making it a career even in this way at the University of Florida. I never would have seen this part coming. As a junior player, you definitely think you're going to maybe be involved in tennis and junior tennis all through until I played at Florida. And then actually after Florida, I did have a great career. I loved my years as a Gator, but I thought I want to get a life outside of tennis. So I left the university, and even though I had a bachelor's in finance, my real love was journalism. So I went to work at the Kansas City Star newspaper and was a sports writer and editor, which was a fabulous way to use my sports knowledge and my journalism interest. Interestingly, for those of you who are students, one of the reasons I went that avenue with finance and not journalism is because of tennis at UF. In order to be a great athlete, I really couldn't do the courses in journalism as well, but business I could do. And because most of the courses were recorded, and you could, if you missed one, you could get one on recording. Now I'm sure they're online or something, but back then we had a media center. So I was able to do my business degree, keep my grades up while being an athlete, which is why I chose business over journalism, except I ultimately love journalism. So there you go, a little short side story. But after my stint in journalism, I interviewed a coach at the University of Kansas, a new incoming coach. And that got me thinking, I really want to get back into tennis. I really miss it. So he needed an assistant, and I guess I kind of needed to get back to tennis, which led me back into the coaching world. And from the college ranks, I ended up moving into the club coaching type business, which has manifested itself in many different country clubs, racket clubs, high performance, children, adults, all kinds of teaching tennis. But what I found from that was that competition anxiety piece, and I was intrigued by that as well. So that's when I went and got my master's in the sports psychology side of, how to coach somebody through the mental game, which I would say was one of my greatest challenges as an athlete. And that led me to get a master's. And once I had a master's, I could all of a sudden be eligible to teach at the university setting. And although I never saw that coming, UF and I matched up again in the way of me being able to teach in both that psychology piece, and now I run the tennis program here at UF.
That's great.
Yeah.
What are the courses you currently teach, and how does that work in the tennis? Like, you work with the professional tennis players, and then you also work with students who are interested in getting into tennis. How is that divided?
Well, the professional tennis management program at UF is the education of teaching people how to lead in the tennis industry. So really it molds my business background and leadership background in the world of tennis. So what UF does is we have this master's that teaches people to become a director of racket sports, which means you're the guy that hires all the tennis pros at a club you probably don't teach that many lessons. You actually run the program. You have to hire, you have to fire, you have to market, you have to build programming, you have to communicate with members, communicate with owners, and maybe a board of directors if it's at a country club. So I train the directors of racket sports. I actually don't coach on court as much anymore. I've left that behind in order to do the academic side of leadership now. So, but I coach coaches. So I'm coaching in my athlete-centered coaching class that I teach at Florida, which is unrelated to tennis, is where I actually work with, young adults, high school level, college level, people that are ADs maybe in high school, or wanting to become tennis sports leaders and not just in tennis. So I work in now through UF, both a general sport management and then this tennis side.
Great, thanks for clarifying. Yeah, you kind of work across the board of players to people as ADs, and I'm sure your experience and insight is excellent for them to see it from so many different angles, even as the industry changes. Having both the pro, like from a youth, I always think if you've experienced youth and then pro, or you played, and pro and college, like all of them give you such different angles to educate on.
Yeah, I think that's one of the valuable things I've realized. In my career, I'm very unique in that I didn't spend 25 years maybe running a club as a director of racket sports. I haven't spent 25 years in any one role, but I've spent so many years in so many different roles that I understand a very broad perspective. And then having a business degree and a journalism background, and then the coaching, and now the leadership and psychology, it gives me so many different angles with which to mold it together, which I think that's what we need to teach the students of today. They really need to have a broader focus. And it's great if they do choose to go deep, but it's not like they must. So that would be, I guess, something we might talk about later, but that's kind of an advice is there's just so much to learn in so many different ways, and then you can bring those worlds together to create unique perspectives.
Yeah, and what are some of the things you love most about what you do right now, and maybe some of the challenging things?
Every day is a challenge because I'm learning so many new things. When you try to understand the university education background, the systems. I mean, I do everything online. So I have to learn everything on Canvas. So I have to communicate without really being with my students, trying to communicate through, Zoom recordings and things like that. It can be challenging because I just don't get enough contact with the people that I work with student-wise. But I love doing that. That's what I think is the best part, is being able to just basically speak into and really answer questions. Just by being a professor and leading a class, I'll have many people just ask me questions that are somewhat related to what we're talking about, or just related to what you're interviewing about careers. I just think we need to give back. So I'm glad I'm in a position now to influence the generations coming up and just answer questions. I have my perspective, which may or may not be exactly theirs, but again, learning from us who have been around, I think is the best way. Just be open. And so I'm happy to just answer those questions of all students. It's a challenge though, every day, just juggling it all. There's a lot going on. Yeah,
absolutely. And I will say, the thing I've learned having worked in the college arena is that, you're like, the things you've had to go through are definitely so helpful. I think of coaching, so I worked for Becky Burley, who is a soccer coach. I also played for her, but the things working alongside her, the things that pop up relationally, and you would know this from the psychology background, I think that in and of itself are just so helpful for other coaches and people in the industry, because there's things you're just not prepared to handle, but people who've gone before you, like, people are people, right? So I think that's one resource. Gosh, you're such like a wealth of that for our students.
Well, that's really what drives me. Honestly, when I was, 12, 15, 18, I thought tennis was the be all end all, and putting another trophy on my shelf was all that mattered. It's so far from that now that sports is, yeah, you want to drive for trophies because that you're putting yourself out there, but all the life lessons you learn, the discipline, the dealing with relationships, the really becoming good at your own personal self-talk and encouragement, the ability to just navigate the pressure and look at it as an opportunity. Pressure shouldn't be so scary it overwhelms you. It should be a challenge. The person across the net isn't trying to hurt you. They're trying to make you rise to a better level. And just being positive, all those things are life skills. And I think I looked at it as my life, like when I decided to quit after I was in college, was like I was done with sports. I wanted to try something else, not really realizing that everything I learned in sports was actually going to bleed into my life. And that's what I want kids to realize now. They're stressed about their sport, but I don't want them to walk from their sport. I don't want them to think that's isolated to sport. I encourage them on the psychology side, just live it, learn it. It's fine. You're fine. You're not going to get hurt by that tennis ball coming across the net. Just be okay in that challenge and be okay in the fact you might lose. Life will go on, and just stay strong and emotionally and not wilt. And I still counsel athletes on how to handle the pressure of sport, and they've lost perspective on the purpose of the pressure of sport. And so for me, sports is the greatest tool ever for life, and that's why I'm fired up about teaching coaches to help kids realize that it really isn't about the trophies on the shelf. It really isn't. And I know the world says it is, but it isn't.
That perspective is fantastic, and it definitely needed in the classroom and beyond, obviously. So, and I can appreciate your frustrations with some of the learning environments and how flat they can be these days. But I think when you bring an element of the personal stories, whether you think they're applicable or not, the storyline has weight. It carries and it cuts across, and I think it brings perspective to a student. So they just think, okay, let me think about my situation and how do I relate that? And I laugh because I always took losses personally when I was in sports, and now I thrive on losing occasionally because I'm like, oh, that was a growth moment. And I think we just need to flip the perspective. So I really like the approach you're taking in that regard. So, but speaking in that vein, you've got quite a background. I mean, 22 years as a pro in regards to that, plus your experience in the classroom now and, taking on challenges, associations, and everything in between. How do you feel over that period? And I think I have a glimpse of what you were alluding to a moment ago, but from a leadership perspective, how have you grown in that realm? And as an innovator, as a person, is there a way that you could measure that in some capacity?
I can. And I would say it comes down to the simple answer of loving the process versus the outcome.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't wait to get off the court and put a W next to my name, because that's what mattered. It wasn't the struggle in the middle was almost like torture to get through so that I could get off and say, yeah, I won 2-2, which was the first question somebody wants to know when you walk off the court. And I had no joy in the moment at some levels, probably did when I was 12 or 14, but by the time I was 20, it was all about finishing. And actually, I was within my master's degree, which was later on, that I realized I just need to enjoy learning. I will get this degree at some point, but right now it's not about the degree. It's about this struggle, which at that point is struggling with time management when you have a family and a job, and it's not like that's all you do. So I stayed up a lot of late nights and missed some activities as I was doing that, but I did it because I enjoyed the learning and the struggle. And then I remember I had a class that was a group project. I was like, I don't want a group project because I got to deal with those people. Right. But then I realized that was so interesting because I watched how they went through the homework and did the assignments. And I was like, that's not a perspective I would have taken. I would not have chosen that, which you could look at it as frustration that I would not have chosen that, or you could look at it as, wow, that's an interesting perspective. And I still wouldn't have chosen it, but I value that they did. And now I can understand it comes differently from two other people.
Right.
But it was such a growth. I really thought actually that group project class was of value. And what was interesting in my teachings at athlete-centered coaching and leadership last spring, one of the feedbacks was the kids wanted more group work, which I looked at, laughed, and thought, last thing I wanted when I was in my master's. But I thought during COVID, they probably did. They probably wanted more reasons to get somehow connected to somebody. So anyway, I just think it's the process. Loving every day, whatever you're doing for that process. And ultimately, you'll have something to show for it, whether it's an A on a paper or a trophy on your shelf, or a C on a paper and a second place trophy or a first round loss. Something in there, it'll all grow you. And I just really appreciate that now. And I didn't when I was in my college for a long time.
No, it's a great perspective. It's funny. It must be a monumental shift in thinking because group projects have always been the bane of students' existence, it seems. What I've always garnered from, though, it's how we work. You got to learn to work with others, even though you might not appreciate their methods. And there's always going to be someone who doesn't do enough, right? Or doesn't respond to an email or something. But you got to overcome that. And I think that's very important life lesson before you leave school. So there's value in that. But if they're wanting more of them, I'm going to give them more of them. But aside from that, and I can kind of sense maybe where you might go with this question, but if you would, as a student, if you will, had learned one thing or knew something before you began your career, what would you have wished that to have been?
I think I would say climbing the ladder of success is not linear. It's more like a climbing wall.
Wow.
Where you go this way and even down in order to go up over there. And I just felt like everybody says I have to get to the next level, the next level, the next level, and I can't take a step back or down. That's forbidden and failure. And when I realized it was more like a climbing wall, I was like, yeah, I can get to the top. It just might not. And frankly, that would tell you not everybody's track will be the same.
Yeah.
And that's another great lesson.
That's a fantastic perspective and analogy, if you will, because I know in my career I have fallen completely off the wall a few times. So smacked the ground very hard, and I'm like, that didn't work out. Where am I going next? Type deal. So, but yeah, no, I will definitely use. That's a great visual. In fact, so I really appreciate that insight.
I think it's so applicable to, every career, but really in sports. It's the same thing as you get a loss, but that doesn't mean you quit playing, that you can't move past it. And so for those in the industry, think about the past year with COVID, how many people got laid off in the sports industry or furloughed. Those things are not the norm, but you have to learn to, keep engaging and go, okay, that wasn't that. Maybe I did take a few steps down the wall and I got to climb back up. But, a lot of people around me did too. And we're all collectively in a different world post.
It's all about our attitude. And, the old saying, responsibility, it's our ability to respond and we have to manage it. And I think everybody, I know for me, I was a little like last March, I was like, is this really happening? I was a bit thrown. And then you realize that it's happening and it's happening to everybody. And it's just that we can't control it, which is why we got so stressed about it. We didn't have any control. So it's like, grab what you can control. I think that's when a lot of people signed up to go back to college and do the things they could control that would be of benefit. And, I've been communicating with my grandchildren by reading books over Zoom. And, it was actually, I probably regularly spoke to my kids in faraway cities and even countries by that on a regular basis. And it was really, in some ways, my young grandchildren know my face better than they might have done if I had lived life and I'd been in a busy way. So we all have to just look at what we can do with what we've been given and then try to be creative and innovative. And I think that's where we all are today. What's the new normal and how does this look now? How do we make a career move? And I know in the world of tennis, life has changed a lot. So I'm sure that's similar in others. Some industries are down and others are up, and now we have to all realign.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so as you've progressed from, the coaching world into what you're doing now, what are some resources you've really used to help you along the way? And I use that kind of broadly. So if it's people or if it's educational opportunities, what did that look like for you? Maybe create two different pockets of those.
Yeah, I think, I came through as a coach thinking that I was coaching forehands and backhands and helping people love the game of tennis the way I loved it. But I soon found that it's really less about the forehands and backhands, and it's more about social connectivity, more about the health of the sport and how people can maintain their own health, physical and mental health, by playing it. And so that's when I got really excited about my master's ideas, getting through and dealing with the psychology side of it, because I felt so many kids are dropping out of sports because they can't handle the stress and they didn't really understand what to do. And frankly, the parents don't know either. I've had plenty of adults that don't really know they compete in tennis or otherwise, and they don't know how to handle the stress, or maybe it's even business. But their kids certainly didn't know how to manage it, because the world's expectations are it's all about winning. And if you don't win, then you're a failure. And so we really had to teach that. So I got excited about that, because helping people, again, learn to use sport as a tool, the process of sport, and not just the victories and the titles next to your name once you're finished. So that's one thing, is I really got inspired about my master's and the reasons for my master's, which is why I kind of persevered through it, even though it got inconvenient, as most degrees do. And then another thing I really got inspired was a book by Jim Lair called The Only Way to Win, which really defined this particular phenomenon. And he is a sports psychologist that he was a USPTA tennis pro and then got in the world did more psychology. But that particular book is written for business leaders, and it's written about this idea of the ego identity. We get so identified with our successes, and that's what happens to many, many businessmen, and they lose track of their life outside of their work, and they become workaholics, and they neglect families, and that's what we do as athletes too. But it's not okay when it's your life for 40 years. Generally, athletics is probably for 10 or 20 years at the most, and you're a teenager and you're probably single-minded at that point anyway. But when you're 45 and all you care about is your accolades and you have a family at home, that's not a win. So The Only Way to Win is a fabulous book, and I just think it really inspired, because it identified kind of what I was doing as a youth, and then how it can translate hazardously into an adult life. So those are really the resources that I found to be really helpful to inspire me to just have a change of perspective. And then that got me, again, the master's got me just wanting to share with others, which is what helped me come back to the University of Florida and say, could I teach a class? And fortunately, I found a door and got allowed to do that, which is really fun, really exciting for me.
Well, we're glad that you're a part as well. So who are some people who have been really influential for you throughout your career trajectory, and how have they influenced you to continue to do what you've been doing?
My husband is super interesting, because he looks at things, he's very much like me. He was a collegiate athlete, a professional and minor league baseball player, and so he's driven in the athletics like I am. But he has a whole different perspective on terms of he's not the perfectionist I am. And he says, set yourself a deadline and then just figure out how to get there. That's as far away from me as I'd be like, it has to be perfect before that deadline gets set, is the way I look at it. So he had all these ideas about ways that I could have, do things. And I was just like saying, hold on, but I sort of drank his Kool-Aid, and he got me inspired to try some things and to step out and to stop being obsessed about having things perfect before I got there. And I felt that was really a perspective that I needed to do. And then I would tell you another one is, good old Florida quarterback Tim Tebow. And I think Tim was the one that really inspired me. I'm in my 20s. I don't know how old I was, 30s. I don't know. When Tim's at Florida, and he's combining his faith piece with his athletics. And I'm thinking, I'm a faithful person. I believe, we want to be kind to others. And usually on the tennis court, I really wanted to hurt that person. I really wanted to win against that person. I wasn't going to be kind to them. And here's Tim playing a contact sport like football, and he's trying to combine that, you can love your opponent. And now I get it. Through his example, I sort of woke up to the idea that those two things aren't unrelated. We can really enjoy our opponent, and they can actually make us better. And one of the things I learned in my classes is the origin of the word competition comes from the word competir, which is to strive with. Mm-hmm. So it's like we need them to make us better. We want to be the best. We need that guy over there or that team over there. And we want them to play their very best because that makes us better. Back when I was younger, I did not want them to play well. It was not in my playbook. And now I really have a different value for that joint competition, and we both have fun trying to reach the best. And it just feels joyful to be in a competition versus vengeful and negative. So yeah, I would say those are two people that inspired me in those ways.
Yeah, I love the perspective change that you had. Because honestly, we're not really taught that growing up. Like, you're not told to cheer for your teammates or to cheer for your opponents or be glad that they're really good. Like, you're just not, I mean, this is generalizing, I suppose, but, you're just there to compete and win, like you said. And I think especially as college athletes too, it gets challenging when you're competing for positions with your own teammates, and then you're cheering them on, and the complexity is there. So I just really, I love that. I wish we could educate more on from a younger age of how the benefit of competing, with each other and pushing ourselves so that it's not always for the win, or it's not always that you're always not looking at other people negatively. You actually,
right. There's a guy, Joe Ehrman, who was an NFL player he has a book called Inside Out Coaching, and he talks about this same concept. And I think when you hear it in football is when you can really buy it, because hearing it in tennis, it's not quite the conflict sport, but in football, if you can really own it, then that's good. And he's very intricate, and he's coaching now. So that's another inspiring source.
Yeah, it's really good. I'm actually inspired potentially to see Tim Tebow playing again for the Jacksonville Jaguars this upcoming season. So it's good to have that kind of individual to look up to in this realm and see it from a different perspective, even if you don't agree with it necessarily, but to appreciate how did he arrive at that place and how does he do what he does and thrive in that environment, which is sometimes hostile. So I think there's some balance in that regard. So
well, I agree, and I mean it is faith or unfaith. Whether you have the faith or not is sort of, it's just the idea of being kind and respectful versus wanting to cut the legs out from under them and break them, right. And or cheat to win. And I'm like, just the idea of being kind and respectful is unique in sport, but it really is what sport. I think what they meant back in the Olympic days when they started it, and we've gone off track.
We've gone off the rails a little bit, yeah. But conversations like this will obviously help us bring us back to center, at least. That would be the goal. So, and speaking of which, because, the students that are listening to this that might be considering a career in tennis or a sport association closely aligned with tennis, and I know you talked about, the climbing wall analogy and basically saying, hey, it's not going to be pretty. It, could take you in another direction completely. But is there a general pathway that a student could follow to be a coach or wind up in a role like yours in some capacity? Is that a possibility, or is it kind of a little bit of luck, a little bit of, position? No. For
sure, there's a definite path. Like if you come through as a player, there are two associations that certify tennis professionals in the United States. One's called PTR and one's called USPTA. If someone decides that they want to, and I think many should, because just as an aside, there are 22% more tennis players now in the United States than there were in the end of 2019. So we have added a ton of players in the U.S. because of COVID. It's 78 feet apart of safety, and it's a great place to be career-wise. But anybody who has an interest in tennis, there are needs in the industry, from whether you're a great player, to maybe not as great, but you're just avid. And by getting certified, meaning going through the education of how to teach the game, because we know there's a lot of difference between playing a game and coaching and teaching the game. You can get that through either of these organizations. And once you get that, you really, there's books and classes, and there's so much education on how to deliver the sport in such a way that the people over there are intrigued and not bored, and they're inspired, and help them learn. Because it used to be that you'd line kids up and you'd feed them one ball and they'd go to the end of the line and wait 6 kids before they got in line. And I think we're going to lose a lot doing that. That's the old style, not the new. But we need to learn those group training tactics. And that's what the organizations do. So those two organizations have incredible education and then experience in the industry, which will start out at could be rec club, could be park and rec, could be a country club. But there are tons of jobs available in that area if you want to keep learning and developing. Once you've been in the industry 3+ years, you're eligible to do a course like I teach, this director of racket sports education, which is around the business of running a program. So once you know the on-court, how to lead group lessons, private lessons, if you want to move up, then you would do this new education, which has not been in existence. In the past, there's been this apprentice mentality. You just had to do your time, and you had to work at a club, and you had to be around a head pro and be around a director and just learn through osmosis. And eventually you got to a point where maybe some other club would be willing to take a chance on you as their leader. But now UF is starting this new program that provides a accreditation as a director of racket sports, so that anybody hiring can look at you and know that you have both the on-court and now you have the business knowledge to be a great leader. So the pathway is actually in tennis very clear through the organizations that are in tennis. What we need is for avid athletes, tennis players, to want to be a teaching pro and move on and be a director of racket sports. What most athletes, I don't know why, but they tend to not consider a career in tennis as like their first choice. It's almost like their backup plan. But a career in tennis, there's tons of opportunities. It's very lucrative. You can, in an initial first-year job for an assistant could be anywhere from $40,000 to $60,000 a year, and then a director of racket sports can make well over 6 figures. It's a very lucrative job. You do have to work some nights and weekends because you tend to work when other people play, but you're also outdoors, and a lot of careers require a lot of work. I talked to one guy who was a lawyer, had gone through law school, left tennis, gone through law school, worked at a law firm for a couple of years, and realized, hey, I'm sitting in this office working 60 or 70 hours a week. I'd really rather be back in tennis. So he got back in tennis. He said, I still work 60 or 70 hours a week, but I'm doing it outside and it's a lot more fun. And it just feels like it's a lot more flexible than slaving away in a law office.
Right.
So it's a unique, but I think wonderful career where you can really enhance people's lives in meaningful ways.
Have you been able to put a pulse on what the resistance might be from, athletes that have played in tennis for 10, 15 years to becoming a coach or a director of a club or something like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually stopped 2 high school kids who were playing tennis on the court next to me last spring and asked them, have you ever considered a career in tennis? And the answer was no. I asked why, and the answers varied from, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer or an engineer. They had these bigger, grander plans in their mind. They were shocked when I told them they could make 6 figures down the road. They never thought about it. Yeah. And it was like an image that they thought, well, it's not good enough. My mom doesn't want me to be a tennis pro. Like, there's just not a real reputation of respect for that. A coach, it doesn't feel like a meaningful job, which again, I think that's a perspective piece. If they think about it's all about sports and all you're doing is helping somebody hit a forehand, okay, maybe that's not that guy. But if you're helping somebody live a healthy, meaningful life, and tennis has been shown to be the racket sports in general have increased longevity. Like, you'll live longer if you play a sport like tennis. So there's so many valuables, and then the social connectivity that tennis provides, the movement on all planes of your body, as opposed to, say, just running or walking. You know, when you have to twist and turn and bend. From a physical perspective, it's great for people. But there are a lot of health benefits to it. It really, honestly, at some point, I probably can't improve your forehand a lot. So it's not really about that. It's really about your lifestyle and the connectivity. So it's a valuable career path, but I think there's a lot of misunderstanding.
Yeah, it's interesting because my daughter, who recently got into tennis, her coach has told the team on several occasions that it was less about winning, which I appreciated, and more about falling in love with the sport because it's a life sport. It wasn't just something you can do in high school and end of game, kind of thing. It was like, this will carry with you for your entire life. So I find it odd, though, that someone would see it as not a clear pathway to make a living in regards to it as a result. So we got to overcome that barrier somehow. I'm sensing. I think it's possible, but maybe it's just kind of a shift in the dialogue about what.
Well, I also think that it's only been not that recently that you could get a college degree in something related to tennis. There are some what they call professional tennis management programs that have been out there for the undergraduate level in a couple different colleges in the U.S. UF doesn't have one, but they have them in North Carolina and Michigan, and where you could get, say, a business degree, but then you get a minor in professional tennis management where you learn how to coach tennis and you even learn how to play, and you come out as a certified tennis professional. Or you might get, it might even be a minor, a bachelor's in science or some other field, but it's a minor program. But there are a couple of those, but obviously us having a master's degree program showing the business side, it's like what we teach is the MBA of tennis.
Yeah.
And we're the only one in the country that has it. There may be some other schools that eventually have it, but the USTA came to UF, since the USTA is based in Orlando. They came to UF and knew that we had the reputation in sport management and in tennis, frankly, and they asked us to do it. So we're excited to be the first one. And this will really, I think, change some of the reputation. Okay. Obviously, to do a master's, you have to have a bachelor's, but we have spun off our tennis classes as a certificate program. So it's a continuing education option for people who either don't have a bachelor's or don't want a full master's. They still can get the knowledge and education around running tennis businesses, which I think is very exciting for the industry.
No, I'm thrilled to have that as an option for the students, obviously, and to promote this in a variety of capacities. But in speaking in that same line, if you will, because we've talked a little bit about how the industry's changed and how athletes have changed. So what do you foresee the future of the industry to look like? I know you said there's 22% growth in the United States with respect to play, but, is that sustainable? Where we go from here, specifically for the college athlete, if you will, if we back up for a second and talk about how is name, image, likeness going to impact them? I mean, there's a lot of change potentially on the horizon. What are your thoughts in that regard?
Yeah, I think that's the answer to your question. In 5 years, if we haven't managed this influx of players, tennis is going to look pretty bad because we've been really lucky to get it. And I do think there's a lot of responsibility for the world of tennis and careers to manage and help these people. However, most of them are joining the game in public parks and in environments that are not related to clubs. So it's going to be hard for the organized, not all public parks have organized programs. There might be just 2 courts down there and 2 courts down there with no teaching pro associated with them. So we as people in the industry are going to have to find those people or be loud enough about how you can connect, because at some point, just going out and play with your family or your friends won't be that exciting, and you need a chance to get a little better. You need a chance to connect with others who are at your level. And that's what our job as industry leaders is. But I think it's connecting those people with those, to get that knowledge passed on. And that will be the challenge. But there are multiple racket sports out there too. It's not just all about tennis. Many in the world have now heard of pickleball, which interestingly was invented in 1965. So the fact that it's become so hot in the last 5 years is not really explainable. I'm not sure what they did. But there are other sports too that are very related, played on tennis courts, other sports played on pickleball courts. There's a couple played inside of, there's one played inside a plexiglass box called padel. One played inside like kind of a chicken wire, which is more in the Northeast, called platform or paddle tennis. But there are multiple ways to play with racket sports, and clubs have them. And so we claim all of that in the world of racket sports, and we need to keep people involved somewhere at some level. But that's going to be a challenge. But people coming out of college with playing ability have an instant track to get into any of these programs. But they do need to get certified as a teaching pro, because they don't necessarily know how to relate to all the varying levels of players. If you're a high-level player and you've just gone up as a high-level player, there's a good chance you don't know how to deal with a 5-year-old that's just starting to play, or a beginner lady or male who's just starting to play. You're not really sure how to help them. You think you do, but if you give them your grip that you're using and the swing that you use, it's pretty much a guarantee they will not know how to hit the ball.
Right.
So the game is so different to a beginner than it is to a high level. So you really do need to get educated in how to teach. But the means are out there through the USTA, through the USPTA, through the PTR. And then I think the market is out there. Literally, we might be going down to public parks and finding people that are hitting balls on the court and say, are you aware of this club or this program, or the USTA needs to connect? It's going to be, I hope the USTA is going to do a really good job of finding those people and connecting them. But that's our challenge as an industry.
Okay, fair.
Yeah, I played some pickleball now, and it's pretty fun. I like tennis as well. I unfortunately didn't grow up learning it, but have kind of picked up after college. So yeah, I think it's really popular in Gainesville. From what I've heard, we've even hosted a tournament. I think my friend entered a tournament last weekend. It's definitely very, very common around here. So going back a little bit to your experience in different industries, what was it like for you transitioning from maybe playing to coaching, getting more education, and then heading into now teaching? We're going to have students who in our online program who are a little older who are transitioning. We have someone working right now for one of the pro teams, and we'll be trying to get into being a professor as well. So for someone like that, what are some suggestions you have for them in the transition period?
Well, I think that it is harder once you've been more successful, a little bit older, because you kind of start to feel like you know the answers, or you understand things in those areas and you're more of an expert. And then you go team and you start to feel a little bit less like, I know what I'm doing. You have to have the ability to be okay with that, with asking questions versus answering questions. And I think just be able to figure things out, but then ask questions. So I know that as I've transitioned, my first inclination when I don't know something is to who can answer that question. But if I think about it a little longer, I kind of can figure parts of it out, or maybe I'll do a little more research. And then I ask a question eventually, but it's a better question. And so I don't just immediately just ask. I figure that, slow down a little bit and say, who would help? Wait, if I ask that, or how would I ask that? Or I'll even start to type the email and then think, wait, I should do more research before I actually ask that question. And then maybe I don't even need to ask it after all. And it's just that uncertainty, and everything takes longer than it used to take me. And I tend to do things fast and like to do things fast. And I had 16 balls in the air, and I can't quite do that. And I end up getting off on rabbit trails when I start to learn something new about something and realize, oh, wait, I didn't really need to do that right now. But it was interesting, and I was learning something new in this area that I need, but I need to get back on track to what does have a deadline. And then just not getting discouraged. I just think it's hard. Again, like I said, when you know something, I could go back right now and teach tennis and make a very good living. I've done that for a long time. I could do it. In fact, there's some part of me that says, I offer a lot in that area, but I also know that when I get up in the morning, the thought of spending 8 hours a day on the tennis court doesn't really jazz me like 8 hours a day working on curriculum and building lectures and interacting with students at UF. So even though I could do that, and I could probably do that well by a lot of people's standards, I know that that's just not really going to make me have high well-being and joy. And I just need to go to this difficult place because it's deeper meaning for me right now. Not that my years as a tennis pro are devalued. That worked for me then, but right now it doesn't. And so choosing the hard path lets me stumble around, and I'm okay with that. And then the other thing is, I'd say energy is always renewable. There's plenty of times when you think that I'm just overwhelmed and I can't do it, or I do too many things going on. And if you just take that time off, whether it's time with your family or go for a run or just really get away from it. I let myself just take a half a day off when I probably should be working to say I just needed to get my brain kind of realigned. And that I learned that when I read the guy named that runs the Energy Project, guy named Tony Schwartz, who actually has worked a lot with Jim Lair, who was the Only Way to Win guy, has done the research around if you can take some time off and renew your energy, then the work you'll do in the future after that, you'll do it much faster and more efficiently. If you just would have stayed there, head down for those 8 hours, it might have been a slog. But if you take those 2 or 3 hours off, then you spend the next 5. Those 5, you can knock out what you would have done in 8. And you'll feel a whole lot better doing it. So I've learned that, and it's been helpful to me.
Yeah, that's excellent, I think, advice for our students. And because I think sometimes you do get in the rat race, and you're like, oh, but if I'm not, I was actually having a conversation with a student right before we started on the pressure to just keep making the phone calls or doing it, and you're behind and everyone else is ahead, and just that whole mentality that our culture kind of has created. So it feels, you almost feel guilty for taking any time off because, well, then somebody else is getting ahead of me or the opportunity's missed, things like that. So that's really great to hear, for our students, and then for those in the industry already who are kind of going back to school and oh yeah, I relate to that. I felt that before, so that's awesome. And I think I loved your insight too on the idea of, going from being on a court or maybe on a field for those who want to coach to being in a classroom or creating curriculum. It's always a give and take. Having worked with the soccer program, I felt that too. You're not with the team anymore. You're more in an office, but you're also creating things that have opportunities to expand, and more opportunities could come. And so I think it's just, having been an athlete, I relate with you on that. Okay, there's days I miss the field and the team, but then there's also really great benefits to the other side as well.
Well, let me offer something too, which I learned. I don't know if you experienced this, but I learned that one of the things that sports teaches you is instant feedback. You know if you won or you lost, and you kind of have a sort of an identity with how you play, even playing well versus not playing well. There's just this feeling of I either accomplished or I didn't, or I felt good after that. When you work with a student, you might have a conversation with a student, you're not fully sure what they got out of it. You just spent 20 minutes talking to them and they leave and you're left with, was it good? Right. Did they get anything out of what I said and offered? And you're but you just have to go from a place of do your best, just impart what you can. And, and Brian's nodding his head. I'm You might find out in 2 months that what you said was like the answer they needed to hear. They didn't tell you in the moment, but that was the words they needed to hear, and they went off and did something. And I just think that was a hard thing, being an athlete, to realize that about life and interaction and work.
It's the long game when you get into the other side of the fence, and sometimes you never know. Yeah, you just pray and hope that my advice and wisdom, experience that I'm bringing to the table will benefit them in some way. There are those, though, that they give you feedback, and they'll tell you 6 months later, a year later, 10 years later, like, you have no idea how much this influenced my life. You're like, oh, those are the moments you live for.
Those are the ones you pull. Yeah, you got the emails in your file cabinet to pull out and read on your bad days. Yeah, for sure.
So, now, speaking of that, from a student perspective, is there a way that they can connect with you online if they wanted to have a conversation with you about, your program, your experience, things like that, moving forward?
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm happy to chat with anyone. I go by my name, Kim Bastable at ufl.edu for email.
Perfect.
That's probably the easiest way, because I think that's what we want to do, is just to be able to help. And for me, being one of the only professors that's really in the world of tennis, to be able to explain the opportunities as a career, it's easier to hear it from someone than to try to read about it. It's almost like, what are you teaching, and how are you teaching it, and who are you teaching it to? And it's confusing. So I'd love to share about it. And then the coaches in general, with the athlete-centered coaching and the psychology side, that's super interesting. I love to help people decide they want to be, athlete-centered coaches and really inspire people versus, just coach. As I said, just coaching a sport. It's not about that. It's far more.
Just coach. I would say there's way more than just coach. That's probably the least significant portion of it this day and age. So, now, with that said, this question kind of stumps some people from time to time. So if you were a student, right, and, if you had the opportunity as a UFSPM student or the community as a whole, what question would you have asked yourself that we did not ask you today that would benefit that student?
Wow.
I know it's loaded. So I said so.
What question would I have asked myself?
It's
Why
tough.
do you think like that? I mean, literally, I think that we, I don't know if this is where you're going, but this is what comes to mind as you're thinking about this, is this, that I think every single one of us is super hard on ourselves. Okay. And I think I was super hard and limiting on what I could do. I think we all say to ourselves, I'm only qualified to do this, or that's the only job I can do, or, I'm not good enough for that, type of mentality. And I would say, why do you limit yourself? I don't think other people limit ourselves as much as we limit ourselves.
Yeah.
And other people read our bio and they go, wow. And we look at our own bio and we go, that's not enough. And it happens, and I see it in all kinds of ages and continually. I have a son-in-law who graduated with his master's from London School of Business, and I am super impressed with him. Yeah. And I feel like he's thinking, well, yeah, but I haven't done anything with it yet. And I'm thinking, well, that was a year ago in COVID. I feel like there's just so much, like, give yourself a huge hand for that. Anybody who graduates from UF and is in our programs, there's so much there to be proud of. Don't limit yourself, and just look for opportunities, and don't feel like you have to know everything. Just be willing to get out and learn. Almost anybody in our shoes, you guys and myself, we just want people that ask questions and care about learning. That's the most important thing. If someone's interested to learn, we're excited to teach them.
No, I know it's a stumper, but you couldn't have responded to that any better. It's funny because I had this very conversation with my wife last night. I said, I am putting more roadblocks in front of my own feet than anyone else around me, and it's frustrating and almost depressing in some capacity, because you're like, I did all this, but it's never enough. And I wish people could just take a step back and just appreciate what you've done and how you've gotten there and what you did with it. And I think people need to take more time to reflect. So I love your message. That's perfect. So Winner, right? No. Now, on Voices from the Field, aside from, some of these lines of questioning that are very professionally oriented and or, student focused, we like to have a little fun. And we've got this rapid fire Q&A that we do. Not complicated. It's chock full of lighthearted questions. So I'll let Shelley take the run on our lead on this one.
Sure. So, Kim, what's going to happen is I set a timer, and then we just go through some questions. I'll throw them at you, whatever comes to mind, and we'll see how many you get through in 1 minute. So and if you want to pass on any, you're welcome to do that too. So are you ready?
Ready.
Okay. First job.
At a bank, and it was 7 months, and it was horrible.
What's the worst haircut you've ever had?
A mullet.
Ooh.
Favorite time of day?
I'm a night owl.
Okay. When you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Ironically, I wrote a paper in like 6th or 7th grade about wanting to be a tennis pro. So there you go.
Nice. Name 2 daily habits.
Working out. Probably working too much.
Okay. Netflix, Prime Video, or cable?
Netflix.
And if I looked up your most played songs, what song or artist would I see?
Michael Bublé.
Okay. All right. That's
that must say something about my age, I'm sure.
No.
I think Michael Bublé's made a comeback. He's got those commercials and things like that for that drink. So
yeah.
People know, right? No, anyway. So this has been fantastic, Kim. I really appreciate you joining us today and taking your time to share your professional endeavors. I know that the University of Florida Department of Sport Management students, the faculty, our alumni appreciate your thoughts. They're very meaningful and purposeful, and I know very helpful at the end of the day. So thank you. So please follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at Everything USPM. We are your hosts, Brian Avery.
And Shelley Lyle.
And Go Gators, right?
Go Gators.
There we go.
There we go.